Agri-environment Schemes, Module 4. In this module, we give an overview of agri-environment schemes with particular focus on results-based and hybrid schemes. The overall principles and design of results-based and hybrid schemes are described, and it is complemented by a number of other presentations on acre scorecard design and plant as results indicators. Fundamental question at the start of the design process is, what are we trying to achieve, and what does an enhanced agri-environment in a farm context look like? I tried to break this down in this slide into basically ensuring that our farm management minimizes impact or enhances the quality of three environmental components on which we depend: land, water, and the air or atmosphere. Essentially, good environmental management aims to enhance the quality of the farmed environment, to provide a wide range of ecosystem services and goods to society. Examples of how this might be done is through, on land, for example, space for nature and maximizing co-benefits for food production through pollination and pest control, water availability and climate regulation, enhancing soil quality, the nutrient balance, biological activity, organic matter and carbon storage. In the water environment, through better nutrient management, minimizing risk of nutrient and sediment loss to water, use of buffer zones and maintenance of wetlands and riparian zones. And in the air or atmosphere, a range of climate actions to improve atmospheric factors which are drivers of climate change are looked at, including ammonia emissions and greenhouse gas emission reduction. And together, if these measures are applied in to the environment, we see the quality of the farm environment enhanced. In terms of results-based payment systems, these are agri-environmental schemes where payments are linked directly to the delivery of the result, rather than a set of actions or prescriptions expected to deliver the result, which is typical in action or management-based approaches. In the results-based approach in Ireland, each field is typically scored out of 10 using scorecards, and the higher the nature quality, the higher the payment. In many cases, the emergent system is a combination of results-based and supporting actions-based payments in what is termed hybrid results-based agri-environment payments schemes. The main differences between these two approaches relate to the link between payments and results, the degree of flexibility in management, the degree to which monitoring is inbuilt, the administrative costs, which can be similar but vary hugely in the action-based approach, whether they're higher or lower tier schemes, and the amount of actions that are involved, the advisory input, the level of targeting, and the number of actions available to the farmer. Generally, with the results-based schemes, you have specialist advisory support available and training, and often in the higher level action-based ones, you also have these available also. Management authorities are generally unfamiliar with the results-based approach, and it often requires adaptation of existing administrative systems, while in the action-based approach, the management authorities have been familiar since the 1990s with the approach, and administrative systems are generally set up for this approach. One thing that's often seen with the results-based approach is they're seen as a higher level of risk for participants where the results are not achieved. Whereas simply in an action-based approach, you can have, once the prescribed actions and the terms and conditions are adhered to, there is no risk of loss of payment, irrespective of whether the action in the particular context delivers the result or not. In terms of results-based payment schemes, or these, what has evolved in Ireland, we've combined essentially the results-based payment approach, using both results-based payments in the outcome and also action-based payments. These have generally been locally adapted, practical and results focused. There's been a balance between incentivizing higher quality outputs and overall scheme complexity. They've aimed to facilitate flexible and adaptive management on farm, and a key component of them has been building local trust and capacity in the systems and between various stakeholders involved in the delivery of the programs. They have enabled co-creation and innovation at farm level because there isn't a strict control of actions or means by which the agri-environmental schemes are delivered. So this incentivizes farmers to actually and advisors to work together to find the best mix of management practices that will deliver the desired result in the particular farm and landscape context in which they're applied. Also, a key principle of the design of this in order to minimize risk has been to ensure that the results indicators selected are not influenced by factors outside of the farmer's control. Results-based agri-environmental payments as a result are essentially facilitate a transaction between society and the farmer via the government or public administration. Society, of which the farmers are a part, decide on the target, results and related objectives that it wants the farmer to deliver, and the agri-environment climate measure is then designed, implemented and monitored to ensure that this transaction takes place to the mutual benefit of both parties. The costings shown in this slide show different mechanisms can be combined in a number of different ways in order to calculate the total costs of the transaction, which form the basis of the results-based payments to the farmer. It must also be noted that the public administration of the scheme has associated public transaction costs that do not form part of the overall payment calculation to the farmer. Other considerations driving budget availability for these programs in terms of the overall budget are the willingness to pay of society through government financing, and they're often working within limited budget allocation. And then on the other side of the contract is the willing to accept of farmers, and this often drives participation rates, and this relates to whether often there are alternative opportunities exist for the farmer and whether it's worthwhile investing their resources, time and effort in delivering the environmental services for the prices offered. Generally, in terms of the payment calculations, they're based on costs incurred and income forgone of the farming practice, which are generally assumed or required to achieve the desired result in a particular context. In Ireland to date, we have focused our results-based payment schemes, pilots and projects on biodiversity targets and associated ecosystem services. But as I'll show in a number of the examples, these have included measures of and results on habitat quality, water, soil and quality and pollination. We showed you this slide at the start of this course. It just tracks the delivery of the implementation story for results-based payment schemes and their development over the last 20 years, starting in the Burn, the upscaling and rollout of the Burn program over the last number of years, through the outscaling of the principles and framework of the hybrid results-based payment system that has developed in the Burn, and testing and development of this in a wider range of contexts, right through the results-based pilots that are operated across the European Union, tested in the Irish scale with the EIP Agri projects. The national pilot REAP was used to test also, and this has led us on now to the CAP strategic plans, and the hybrid results-based approach is adapted in its full context through the acres cooperation projects, with some actions within the acres general being paid on a results-based scoring system. In order to design results-based payment schemes, you must have a clear focus on what is your starting point and what are the goals you wish to achieve. A key principle when it comes to these are that you should retain what you have, enhance it and restore what has been lost. And I'm going to use the farming for nature illustrations to communicate the quality of a landscape, or the desired quality. In this slide, we see an area that is poor from a nature perspective. I wouldn't say this is typical from all over the country. It's just we've divided what potentially is the scenario landscape into what it would look like in a poor, medium and good quality context. You see in this context, you see there's areas here from the uplands in the top of the picture right through to the lowland areas along the banks of a river. You see the livestock have direct access to the water course. There has been removal of hedgerows to create paddock systems in the past. There is drainage of the wetlands to create forestry and direct connections between the field drainage systems and the river system itself. In this context, there's little space for nature in the semi-natural ecosystems that are there. They are also in poor condition. So you can see here that this would be an area that would be poor in terms of its environmental quality, which would be reflected in terms of the biodiversity quantities and quality in this area, the water quality, and also the emissions from a particular area like this. The same landscape, though, can be enhanced. You'd see as it moves through the moderate here, there's higher biodiversity, more space for nature. There's fencing off of the water course. There's increased field boundaries, natural field boundary structures such as the hedgerows and the ditches as well, but still some direct connection with the water in parts of this picture here. And then on the right-hand side, we see a fully restored and enhanced landscape with mature native trees providing shade and shelter within the system that has benefits for livestock as well, particularly when we have a context of increasing drought and higher temperatures during the summertime in particular. We have well-managed enhanced hedgerows with associated fenced-off field margins. We've wide buffer zones keeping livestock out of the river, and these are in a semi-natural states. And we have the semi-natural peatland systems with extensive grazing systems in parts of the areas, but restored peatlands in other areas as well, and restored wetland areas, and no direct drainage connections with the main water bodies. So we see here what good looks like and how it can be achieved. Many of these measures will be incentivized in some form or another through the CAP green architecture, but planning where to target measures and how to integrate them into individual farms is key to the successful implementation of the policy and key to ensuring better outcomes for nature, society, and the economy. So moving away now from the general principles, so we know we have to know what we need to achieve in a results-based systems. It has to be clearly defined. But in terms of the payment systems, these are based on scores and quality scores of individual features or the entire farm for that matter. So farmers are familiar with scoring systems in general for products they produce. For example, the food they produce, factory cattle grading systems, the way that milk quality is measured through milk solids and protein levels, for examples, and the result indicators of these, for example, and are often things like in terms of condition scoring animals, you have the three main results indicators here. You have the fat cover or bone prominence over the loin, pins, and ribs. Basically, what we're trying to do with the scoring system for results-based payment is to come up with a similar system for the condition scoring of a farm or a section of a farm or features within the farm. Guidelines on good results indicators have been developed in various handbooks through results-based agri-environmental pilot schemes initiatives across the European Union for over the last number of years. And these characteristics of good results indicators are illustrated in this slide. So you see they need to reflect variation in the condition of the target and occur consistently across the target area. Because it is an agricultural landscape, they need to respond to agricultural management, be within the farmer's control, as I mentioned previously, and also be easily understood by the farmer, advisor, and paying agency after training. Often with these, you need an optimum combination and weighting of results indicators. We often use a number of indicators that reflect the relative importance they the weighting reflects the relative importance to the target. We try to minimize complexity as much as possible, making sure we don't have too many results indicators, or we don't have redundant indicators measuring the same thing, for example, or a correlated element of the quality of the feature. They must provide a robust measure of quality, and they must provide an early warning system and clear signals to the farmer on the success of their current management. Taking these guidelines into account, the foundation of our results-based payment schemes are various field scoring systems that have been developed over the last number of years. They've generally taken the form of 10-point scoring systems using an optimum combination of results indicators. We have generally two broad categories of indicators used. These include ecological measures of ecological quality, which is a generally set of positive and negative indicators, and their cover in a particular parcel. These being often focused on vegetation, or in most cases, nearly in all in Ireland, focused on vegetation, with an element of vegetation structure as well as species presence taken into account. Often our scorecards have an A and a B section. The B section, the indicators measure things like the hydrological or soil conditions and a range of threats or damaging activity to the future prospects of these areas. Now, not every system includes all indicator types, and depending on the habitat, be it peatland, woodland, or grassland, or the particular target species, various indicators can be adapted to make sure they correlate well with the overall goal of the program. At this stage, through the various pilot programs, through the BURN, the EIPs, various life projects, a range of scorecards have been developed for various habitats, mainly focused around grassland, heathland, peatland, woodland, and particular features within these areas and field boundaries. The emerging general scorecard structure is what we term a multi-criteria, using a range of criteria to assess the ecological condition for the delivery of multiple ecosystem services. So these cards don't just measure the quality for nature, they also often correlate with the measurements of soil quality and also the risks to climate in terms of soil integrity, bare soil and erosion, indicating the amount of carbon safely stored within the soils, or the potential for loss of carbon from the soils. Essentially, what we're doing with these is condition scoring the fields on the farm. A lot of research and a lot of testing of these various scoring systems has taken place in Ireland and across Europe over the last number of years, using detailed management or detailed monitoring of various taxonomic groups, invertebrates, plants, bird species, and trying to understand how these correlate with the results indicators, or improving the results indicators so there's better correlation between the actual overall scoring system and the actual response of the biodiversity targets or soil quality or water quality targets within the particular area. Overall, three broad hybrid models have evolved in the last 10 years, combining the results-based payments, supporting actions, and sometimes also bonus payments or whole farm risk assessments for water. The simplest system, number one, there is a hybrid results-based payment with supporting actions. And the supporting actions are based on where you've got low habitat quality scores, and the particular result indicator that's leading to that low scores can trigger a number of supporting actions. So all the supporting actions are still devised to try and enhance the results-based payment in this context. Number two adds in a whole farm assessment or multiplier. This is particularly important in a water context. You can have a number of features on a farm that I'll illustrate in a minute that can be of very high quality, resulting in high payments, but you can have some sacrifice areas that will be leading to issues for water quality, for example. So when you have water quality as a particular target, you often need to make sure that the whole farm is performing to a certain basic standard. And also within these, you can include floodplain payments as well to reward storage of water at high water levels and reward the farmers for them actions as well. Again, these are often combined with supporting actions to put in the existing infrastructure where it is put in new infrastructure where the existing infrastructure is poor in order to get high up on the scoring. And then we also have a third model that has developed, which includes bonus payments. So it's very similar to one. You have your results-based payments for various features on the farm, supporting actions to enhance the quality of them features or put in features where they do not exist. But in some areas, you might have a target species, for example, that's roaming over a large area of the landscape, and you want to ensure that the farmers are incentivized to work collectively for the benefits of that species. So a certain amount of the payment is retained as a bonus payment, and there's targets set for the target species in terms of their fledging rates, for example. And once them targets are met, then at a landscape level, all the farmers that have achieved a particular quality get a share in that bonus. It's often a very small amount of the payment that's retained in this way, but it creates a direct link between the payments and the target species. This is particularly useful in an area where you might have persecution of a species in the past, and in areas like the hen harrier program where this bonus payment structure has been utilized, it has led to basically a complete reduction in the actual persecution of these species. And it's not that the people that have been getting the payments are persecuting the species in the past, it's just that you have 30, 40, or up to 100 farmers in a particular area that are now see that species as part of the products from their farms, and they don't want anyone doing any damage to that. And this is known within the wider community. So persecution does fall off in that context. So there's a lot of subtleties in terms of the design models, in terms of how we combine results-based payments and action-based payments for particular targets that have evolved over the last number of years, 10 years in particular, in terms of testing these in an Irish context. Just some concrete examples. The hen harrier project looked at one of these endangered species, the hen harrier, but it also had co-benefits and paid for individual features such as peatlands, grasslands, and woodlands, enhancing the overall biodiversity and services from these areas. In these areas, they invested in an intensive monitoring system, and this was justified on the extinction threat to the species, and also was a legislative requirement under the Birds Directive to monitor the populations of these species, particularly in the special protection areas. So there was a national monitoring system that needed to be put in place for the Birds Directive. So the monitoring data, if it is aligned, can be used as a means of calculating a bonus payment, or a means of calculating a bonus payment. There's obviously natural variation. The annual numbers are influenced by factors outside the farmer's control. So the majority of the payments focused on factors within their control. The habitat quality in their particular fields or parcels, delivering for foraging habitat and also nesting habitat for the species. But also there was objectives in this to increase the overall biodiversity and reduce the risk of soil erosion in these areas. So they wanted to put a direct value on the species itself, but also make sure the overall landscape was improved in terms of a range of other biodiversity, water, and carbon features or storage features within the landscape. Another variation on how the results-based payments are combined with action-based and some subtlety in design. This is the example of the pearl mussel project. So they had incorporating at farm level results indicators for water targets that looked at the entire farm. So the individual scorecards, the peatland, grassland, and woodland ones, concentrate on field or parcel level. But as we know, we need a whole farm or landscape level approach to deliver particular environmental targets such as water. So in the pearl mussel, which is an example of one that had clear aim to improve the quantity and quality of water. Here, the scorecards for various habitats are combined within an overall farm assessment, which cover farmyard risk assessment, risk of nutrient and sediment loss, and flow regulation. And recent drainage or fully naturalized hydrological systems are an example of the one of the indicators that were included here. So whether the drainage system was fully naturalized or recently undergone drainage. So you can see here what's done here is the habitats on the farm are scored, assessment of the length and width of the floodplain, the quantity of the floodplain. So that works out the overall score for the particular parcels in terms of habitat quality. The targets for these were biodiversity, water and soil. And then the whole farm is assessed to check and see what risks there are of nutrient and sediment loss using a number of indicators that are highlighted there in the whole farm assessment. And depending on how you scored on that, you get basically you're multiplied your results-based payment by 0.3, 0.61 or 1.2, which is essentially a bonus for excellent quality. Many of the ones that scored here on a 0.3 or 0.6, they're relatively easy actions. There's drains with direct access to things, so you can put in basically artificial sluices or a certain amount of cut off, as I'll illustrate in the next, cutting off the direct drainage from the channel. You can put in interception ponds, for example, fencing off riparian zones. And a lot of these that are done in the first year can result in your score going from 0.3 to 1. So there's a big incentive to actually address some of these whole farm issues quickly in the first 12 months of the project, which was what happened in reality when this was tested in the Pearl Mussel project. So this is a theoretical example of a before and after farm. You can see here there's some areas here on the farm. On the top here, there's an excellent quality peatland here, intact peatland with extensive grazing on it. It's scoring a 10 out of 10. There's an area here where it's not as scoring as well. This peatland area of the farm, there's some areas of patches of heavy grazing and bare grounds. That's a moderate quality peatland. You also have some issues here with invasive species such as rhododendron in this area. The semi-natural grasslands themselves in this, they were of a range of quality. Some of them were used for silage fields, for example. So the main product of that is for food production, but they were scoring low on the nature value. And some of the semi-natural vegetations were good, would coming near to 8 out of 10 and 10 out of 10, some excellent quality ones here. But there was no riparian buffer zones in many of these areas here. And particularly on the ones that were intensely managed here, there was direct access to the water from the cattle, and also the drainage system here was recently cleaned and with direct access. So these are real risks here of sediment and nutrient runoff from these fields here in particular. So the farmer, if you didn't have this whole farm assessment, might be quite happy to take the payments they have on this. But in this context here, there was a multiplier of 0.3. They knew they were losing out on a large proportion of their payments in the first year if there wasn't work done on these areas. So they get advice, they get supporting actions to actually put this in. So put in fencing off the river here where there's the most risk, taking away the feeding sites, putting in interception points here to actually intercept the sediment runoff here through wooden or plastic drain blocking systems here with a certain amount of overflow here to let the water pass through, but not the sediment, for example, and creating riparian zones along all the intensely managed fields in this context. So in this context, over a number of years, the field scores are going up. The multipliers are 1 to 1.2 in this particular context. They're dealing with the invasive rhododendron species as well. So there's a substantial difference of 60–70% between the scores from this at the start in the year 1 of the program and years 3, 4, and 5 here in the program as well. So you can see here is a real incentive in this results-based system for the farmer to improve over time. Generally, with these as well, they were measured by advisors employed by the farmer with oversight by specialist teams in the range of pilot programs. There was substantial training of advisors and farmers, generally having annual farmer and advisor training, a mix of mandatory and voluntary sessions that were undertaken by specialist teams in these areas. So there was a number of challenges during the pilots, but a lot of lessons learned. And in terms of the lessons learned, a lot of these have been brought forward in terms of the design of the National Acres Programme. What we have seen with these is there is so much variation and diversity across the country that local adaptation is required for both actions and results-based approaches. If we want agri-environmental schemes to achieve their objectives, we have to take into account and realise that one size does not fit all. So results-based and action-based are not an either or either. Okay, results-based need specific objectives, quantifiable and reliable indicators, targets and thresholds of performance. So they need clarity of policy, and having them in place drives clarity of policy. So if people are going to get paid on results and taxpayers are going to pay for results, you need clarity on what the resultant goals are. With proper planning, and they can ensure the right measure in the right place, but they need specialist local support, knowledge sharing and advisory systems, and they need an adaptation of the governance and administration structures to make them work. A partnership approach across local community and state actors to build capacity and trust is essential. Local action plans play a key role in terms of diagnosis of the issues within it, communications of what the results are, and acting as an adaptive management tool, incorporating the monitoring. So these are often living plans. We have found that results-based payment in particular will incentivize maintenance and enhancement of existing environmental infrastructure, both on land and in water, in a farmed environment. Where the existing infrastructure is poor or absent, and we need restoration, rehabilitation of this green, blue infrastructure, it needs supporting action to give it that kickstart to get on a level of enhancement and maintenance. Landscape or catchment goals require coordinated or collective action, coordinated by a central team which guides the application of the measures with the farmers on the ground, or collective action where farmers share or develop actions together or share in the bonus of delivery of that action through bonus payments, for example. So we've seen over the last 10 years or more that results-based payments approach incorporating actions and these various different types of designs improves the effectiveness in achieving their environmental goals. But it is quite clear that results-based don't work in isolation. Successful design of these and working towards effective and feasible implementation. I think the best analogy is the car. So they're quite complex under the hood, but for advisors and farmers, if they're well designed, they should be easy to drive, essentially. So easy to get from point A to point B. These have been extensively designed, tested and trialed across the country and across Europe. We see this emerging common design approach across these diverse agricultural subcatchments or areas of the country. And that common design approach is possible with local adaptation. We see that the use of these diagnosis and action plans as living plans is a mechanism to ensure the right measure in the right place, and guidance and training for integrated local farm advisory systems, incorporating peer-to-peer, technical and specialist support, and use of online technology has been important. So we see this key role of these specialist support teams, but they do require institutional and administrative innovation in how financing, administration, monitoring and verification of the payment systems. But use of and appropriate use of technology can greatly improve efficiencies. But overall, the system, what we've seen in the last 10 years is a building of trust and capacity across all stakeholders in the delivery of these, and that has to continue through the rollout phase. So this is where we've arrived at in terms of the development cycle. So in many of these programs, we start with a plan, the diagnosis of the issues, clear visions for where we want to go, and an action plan for implementation. They're focused on a results-based approach, which incorporates the results-based payment and clear communication of what the results are. It's complemented with supporting actions, but requiring an overall arching coordination or partnership at landscape level, and cooperation between both the state and the community to deliver these overall on individual farms through farmers, and enhancement of their role in the delivery of environmental services in these areas. So the diagnosis and action plan, these are living plans. I know they're being developed at the moment through the cooperation projects, but the diagnosis is the starting point. So taking together a lot of information that's out there from various agencies on the state of nature, water and climate and the landscape overall, taking into account sustainable development goals to come up with overarching long-term visions or strategies for the target area. And these are broken down into specific objectives for specific themes and incorporated into the ACRES program. So background information, the catchment characterization, numbers of farms in an area, the land tenure, the geology, climatic conditions, the biological information, and socio-economic information are all important in terms of evaluation and the rationale for the measures that are to be applied, and the appropriate combination of results-based and what supporting actions or landscape actions are required within the area. So we have a clear vision and objectives in these areas, clear targeting and zoning specifications for measures that have been developed, and supporting actions and cooperation or landscape measures, and also the farm plan template. So how you basically distill all this down into a simplified map-based plan structure is essential for good communications. But these should have a certain amount of monitoring, verification of the scores, for example, and the payment system built into it. But this monitoring verification should act as a feedback mechanism so that we adapt our management, and we have continuous enhancement, review and evaluation as we go on, essentially learning while doing. So the whole planning process of this, the whole plan is a holistic integrated land use catchment management plan for an area. The plan itself will be complex by the very nature of the complexity we're dealing with in terms of these range of services, taking into account food and fiber provision, but also the quality of water, air and nature services. When we have a zoning approach, in each zone, this should be less complex, but for individual farms, it should be ultimately simplified, working on their specific context, that they have clear guidance on the most appropriate measures, what fields are scored, what actions are required, depending on where their fields are in low quality, medium quality, or high quality. So a lot of these principles have been incorporated into the agri-environment cooperation areas in particular. So we have two broad approaches within the ACRES program. We have the general measure, similar to the previous national scheme GLAS, that has enhanced some of the measures and incorporated a small number of results-based elements into it. But then the cooperation measure is targeted at high environmental priority areas that are dominated by semi-natural vegetation, and also incorporate more than 70% of the waters in the country with high status objectives, and they have a high proportion of designated nature areas under various EU legislation as well. When these areas have been identified, the catchments have been brought together in 8 local areas, and these 8 local areas, cooperation project areas, will have local area plans. This should incorporate a diagnosis and action plan that adapts the overall measure framework to the local context, recognizing the one size does not fit all within the design. We have specialist cooperation project teams delivering these and supporting the delivery of these within the 8 cooperation project areas. So as you can see, there's many of the designed elements that that were in the various pilot programs incorporated into what we now have as an implementation of a hybrid results-based payment scheme model with specialist advisory support and investments in supporting actions and landscape actions as well. So essentially this is aiming to realise at a broader national context this locally adapted hybrid results-based payments. Thank you.